The multiverse and time travel in Marvel Comics. The multiverse and time travel are two of the most popular concepts in all of science fiction, and no publisher does them better than Marvel Comics. What is up, Nerd Squad? Today, we're gonna be taking a look at how Marvel Comics' version of the multiverse and time travel works. Let me know in the comments if there is another aspect of the Marvel universe that you'd like me to explain, but today let's talk about time travel and the multiverse. To understand how time travel and the multiverse work in Marvel Comics, it helps to first understand some of the key elements of both. First, let's start with Kang the Conqueror. In order to truly understand how time travel works, you need to understand one thing. All time travel in Marvel Comics can be traced back to this man, Nathaniel Richards, aka Kang the Conqueror, aka Mr. Fantastic. Now I have a full video explaining who Kang the Conqueror is and how he is one person from different time periods. But for the sake of brevity, when Nathaniel Richards was a young man, he traveled back in time and became the warlord Kang the Conqueror. When he died, his advanced future tech just sort of stayed in the past, allowing him to become a kind of immortal conqueror across history. This also meant that there were plenty of Kangs scattered throughout history with his advanced technology, which would eventually lead to a whole host of future heroes and villains in the 31st century. But for our purposes, it's important to note that all of these different versions of Kang are essentially the same person. It is Kang from the 40th century who eventually becomes the leader of the Time Keepers and the Time Variance Authority, which brings us to our next key element, the Time Stone. In the comics, there are actually multiple Time Stones. However, they are very rare and their power is basically limitless. While other Infinity Stones may grant their user powers over reality, space, mind, or soul, the Time Stone gives its user control over time itself. As such, the Time Stone has been used to undo entire timelines. The Time Stone has even been used to erase an alternate universe from existence. That's how powerful the Time Stone is. It is not a toy. Because of the threat the Time Stone poses to the natural order of the universe, it has long been protected by the cosmic entity known as the Time Keepers. Who are the Time Keepers? Well, they are an advanced alien race that exists outside of time and whose sole purpose is to safeguard the flow of time. And because of the Time Keepers' desire to protect the timeline, they created the Time Variance Authority, aka the TVA, to enforce the Time Keepers' will and ensure the timeline remains protected. You've probably heard of the TVA. They're one of the more well-known aspects of Marvel's time travel lore, thanks to the Loki series on Disney+. In the show, the TVA prunes alternate timelines, and timelines deemed outside of the sacred timeline are pruned out of existence. However, while this is a good summation of the TVA's role in safeguarding the timeline, things aren't quite so simple. Depending on the era of Marvel Comics you're looking at, the TVA's role varies wildly. For example, in the Ultimate Universe, the TVA is an artificial intelligence tasked with pruning timelines. While in mainstream continuity, the TVA is made up of living beings overseen by the enigmatic Time Keepers. Regardless of their exact nature, though, the TVA's job is to protect the timeline from those who would do it harm. Now this leads us to our next key piece of the puzzle, Nexus events. So the Time Keepers and the TVA protect the timeline from those who would do it harm. But what exactly causes harm to the timeline? Well, as it turns out, every time someone travels in time, they cause what is known as a Nexus event. A Nexus event is any change to the timeline caused by a traveler changing an event or creating a new event that never happened before. Nexus events can cause rifts in the timeline, leading to alternate histories, branching timelines, new universes, and even the creation of entirely new time streams. So Kang, being one of the first time travelers in Marvel Comics, had a lot of Nexus events under his belt. In fact, many of the alternate histories seen in Marvel Comics can be traced back to Kang's actions. However, after the Council of Kings in the 80s storyline, the remaining Kangs agreed to stop creating Nexus events, at least for a while. However, one Kang would go on to break this agreement, leading to the destruction of the main Marvel universe and the birth of the Marvel Multiverse. Speaking of the multiverse, we haven't really talked about that yet. Well, in order to explain the multiverse, we're going to have to turn to Doctor Strange. Now, I also have a full video talking about the multiverse in the MCU, but since that video came out, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness radically changed how the multiverse works in the MCU, so now the multiverse is explained through Doctor Strange. See, according to Doctor Strange, the multiverse isn't a collection of infinite alternate universes. Instead, the multiverse is made up of infinite different dimensions, each existing on a different plane of reality. These dimensions are accessible through portals that exist in the astral plane and are protected by the mystical barriers known as the Dark Dimension, the Mirror Dimension, the Underworld, and the Other Side. Now, of course, this is a radical departure from the explanation given in What If, where the multiverse is explained as an infinite number of alternate Earths that are in a constant state of flux, where even the smallest change in one world could cause an entirely new universe to be born. So the MCU version of the multiverse is a lot more Lovecraftian than the comics version, which is a lot more like a collection of parallel worlds. Which brings us to our last major storyline, What If? The What If stories are some of the most popular stories in all of Marvel Comics. These stories allow creators to explore alternate versions of characters and settings, and the What If stories have led to some of the most iconic Marvel comics ever. Examples of popular What If stories include What If Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? What if Professor X had been the one to wield the power cosmic? And what if Thanos had adopted an alternate version of Gamora? But perhaps no What If story has had more of an impact on Marvel Comics than What If, where the multiverse was explored in depth and alternate versions of Marvel's heroes and villains ran rampant. The What If stories in the comics and the What If animated series allowed readers to see the endless possibilities of the multiverse and showed the true extent of Marvel's imagination. So how do all these pieces fit together? Well, let me show you. Essentially, in order to keep things simple, let's say you're in the main Marvel universe. Maybe you're in the MCU. One day you decide you want to travel in time. You get yourself a time stone and set about your time-traveling ways. Well, maybe you're a hero like the Avengers. Or maybe you're a villain like Kang the Conqueror. Regardless, every time you travel in time, you create a Nexus event. If you do something different, you create a new timeline. If you kill Hitler, you create a new universe where Hitler never existed. If you team up with Kang to take down Immortus, you might accidentally create a brand new multiverse. And then once you've done something drastic enough to create a new universe, maybe your alternate version of yourself stays in that new universe. Now, that new version of you is an alternate version of the you that sent the ripples through the timeline to create the new universe in the first place. If that makes sense in the comics, this is how alternate versions of characters like Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Avengers, and even the Fantastic Four came to be. And in the MCU, this is how alternate versions of Loki, Doctor Strange, Wanda, and America Chavez came to be. But regardless of what you do, if you create a Nexus event that creates a new universe, you can bet the timekeepers and the TVA will be watching you and deciding whether or not your universe gets pruned from existence or left to continue on its own path. So there you go. That's how time travel and the multiverse work in Marvel Comics. It's a little complicated, but when done right, it's absolutely amazing. There's no better example of this than Secret Wars, specifically Secret Wars 2015. In this story, the multiverse had been reduced to Battleworld, a pocket dimension where all the heroes and villains were forced to fight for survival. It was up to a group of unlikely heroes to save the multiverse from destruction. Secret Wars 2015 is a perfect example of how the multiverse and time travel can come together to create a truly epic story. What do you think? How would you explain the multiverse and time travel? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace out, nerds.